Now, this is part A of the Khoodeelaar television channel being broadcast live only on the internet from London in the quote UK on Monday, the 19th of July 2021, which is coinciding with the official observation of the second Muslim Eid al-Adha, which is associated with the sacrifice made by the Prophet Ibrahim, peace be on him, also known as Abraham. And the Muslim populations in the world observe the Eid al-Adha by making ritual sacrifice of lamb and animal. But the understanding of the sacrifice, the spirit and the lesson of sacrifice on the evidence of the Muslims' behavior over the last 1400 years shows that Muslims overemphasize the particular ritual while they don't observe and they don't practice the actual lesson of sacrifice, which is against the motto of the congenital liar, like Boris Johnson. He said boastfully that greed is good. Greed is not good ever. Greed is bad. Greed is dystopian. It is evil. It is against compassion, against solidarity, sympathy, care, and concern, and justice. We have a congenital liar as Boris Johnson in post, who actually believes greed is good. So there is a problem in his understanding of the concept of sacrifice as contained in the message of Eid al-Adha. For individual Muslims, and I believe that applies to Muslims of all backgrounds in terms of ethnicity, in terms of gender, in terms of other things, Muslims do not have the record that they should have had of exhibiting, demonstrating, living examples of being for compassion, for opposing greed, and for solidarity. And today is the first day officially in the UK, and it has been a bit earlier in other parts of the world, depending on the actual calendar. But the point is that Muslims have the duty to learn the lesson of sacrifice, which is to give up and to share. How many Muslims in power in so-called governments, in so-called Muslim majority states, live the life of being exemplars of opposing greed and corruption, and of advocating and advancing sharing? and caring. These are all of the highest values, universal values, and they have been available as part of the religion faith, primarily to Muslims, right from the beginning of the faith. And yet, of the world's, the planet's most deprived peoples, a large, significant, too large proportion of the poor, the deprived, and the disenfranchised and the rightsless happen to be Muslims. That is contradictory. That is in conflict with the message of Islam, with the message of today, Al-Adha, Eid al-Adha. And we shall be, during the whole week, extrapolating and expanding on this message. One of my poems in the late 1990s, I wrote it in English, in denouncing the greed among Muslims, is called Eid is Greed. That was a very long time before the congenital liar Boris Johnson got anywhere near the news items saying that he would be in post as the leader of the so-called Conservative Party. So, long before Boris Johnson was heard of in terms of a personality in politics in this country, I spelt out, literally I spelt out his, in opposition to his psychosis that was to be. Okay, we shall move on to the Financial Times of today, Monday the 19th of July 2021. And there is a letter in the Financial Times which says racism charge is as hard to refute as heresy in 1500s. Putting to one side the motivation of the current UK government, football triumphs benefit unscrupulous government, letters July 15th, I doubt whether all criticism of knee-taking must be intrinsically racist. In the current climate, such accusations are as easily made and as difficult to refute as those of heresy were in mid-16th century England. And let's not forget that a year ago it was the Labour Party leader Keir Starmer who took the political initiative by genuflecting for the camera in his office of all places, but for once without the Union Jack by his side. Was he signaling he'd like to defend the police or remove statues or halt, stop and search? Who knows? And by the way, the letter writer should know that at football matches, you are part of a crowd, not an audience. Audiences go to the theatre and concert hall and generally behave differently. Thank goodness. So there is the editorial, second editorial in the Financial Crimes, which actually gets the heading right. Pollard's defiance of the European Union law must be stopped. If Poland's government does not like the obligations of being in the European Union, then it should prepare to leave. Most Poles would recoil at the idea, knowing that membership has underpinned their country's success, but their government's actions are going to cost them one way or another. one way or another was the phrase that was used by a racist liar based at 164 Brick Lane, London E1 6RU. Around the time, say around a year before the attack on the Kitten's house took place, we shall extrapolate, elaborate, and diagnose on that one in due course. Now, going to the Pegasus project report about the use by India's Narendra Modi, including other fascistic oppressive regimes across the world, using the services of an Israel-based spying operation or application to spy on critical journalists and campaigners against the regimes concerned. And one of the targets of that attack has been listed as the current editor of the Financial Times, the woman who is said to have been born in Lebanon and is of Muslim origin. But as we said, the Financial Times is not worthy of being called the Financial Times because it is a platform of liars and lies and deniers. So regardless of why her targeters might have targeted her as one of the journalists to be targeted as being too radical and too critical, regardless of that, we find that this Lebanese-born woman editor of the Financial Times is in post publishing a corrupt criminal title. Why? Because all the articles in the paper today, let's say, including the briefing one, we shall go to that briefing one in a minute. There is a piece, yes, by this one, Pilita Clark, Business Life, and the heading is Mediocre Workers Have Nowhere to Hide. Now that is a stupid, the workers, idiotic piece, and it's falsely headed. So the editorial, whoever wrote this editorial or sub-edited this piece under the editing of this Lebanese-born person, is an idiot and a dishonest, crooked one at that, because the last paragraph of the Pilita Clark Business Life item, wrongly headed, Mediocre Workers Have Nowhere to Hide, the last paragraph reads, researchers found hours worked shot up about 30%, which included a lot of work done outside working hours. But the extra hours did not bring any rise in output. So the study concluded overall productivity had declined by about 20%. In the last paragraph, very last paragraph, this does not necessarily make the work from home skeptics right. How dare this Pilita Clark idiot or the financial crimes idiots. If mediocre workers have nowhere to hide, then how is it that the skeptics against them, they make the work from home skeptics, how is it that they are wrong, the skeptics? The study did not directly measure the quality of work done. then why is this headline there? Mediocre workers have nowhere to hide. If the quality of the work done was not measured, then why is this headline there? Which is absolutely directly based on the assumption that the work was measured. So she says, the study did not directly measure the quality of work done, all of which underlines the complexity of the great COVID remote working experiment and why it is far too early to draw fixed conclusions about it just yet. Then why is the headline there? Why is the piece there at all? Pilita Clark is a dishonest, lying, anti the poor, anti workers self-seeker, doing the self-seeking as a careerist by the financial crimes, which is why we are correct to call it financial crimes. Now, there is another stupidity and dishonesty in a piece by one of the two Indians whose pieces are published on page 23 of today's Financial Crimes. One is Anjana Ahuja, and her heading is Today is Surrender Day, not Freedom Day in England. And the other one is the Uttar Pradesh-born, self-seeking Ruchir Sharma, who is self-seeking through the American Morgan Stanley Investment Management as their chief global strategist. Sharma is a liar. All his so-called books about success and successful states and so on are completely corrupt and dishonest, and they don't actually criticize. None of his pieces has ever really tell the truth about the liar Narendra Modi. He has written, this Sharma has written lots of titles, but they're all sham, dishonest, false. Now this Anjana Ahuja, her last paragraph says, mass infection risks swamping hospitals, decimating workforces, sickening the young and weak, and creating vaccine-resistant variants, all of which could lead to further lockdowns and ultimately less freedom. This is not learning to live with COVID-19, but caving into it. And her piece is clearly talking about the numbers of infections rising. And the infections currently, at the time she wrote it, obviously, are running at 54,000 new cases daily. Still, businesses can throw open their doors. Mask mandates are out, and the legal requirements for social distancing binned. So it's a critical piece there. But the critical piece is not consistently replicated and expanded on in the rest of the financial crimes. The main headline is, of course, Johnson and Sunak isolate as staff shortages weigh on Freedom Day. U-turn on avoiding quarantine, test and trace alerts 530,000, and food supply warnings. So, food supply warning has been obvious on the ground because, as we have been saying, for weeks that supermarket shops shelves are being depleted of essential supplies and essential stock. I mean, this is true of the state of stock in supermarkets, including Sainsbury's, as of this morning, Monday, the 19th of July, 2021. And there are several pieces, of course, that actually contain aspects of the warning that Johnson has got it wrong again. This one is dawning of Freedom Day means worry for Newcastle. Surging COVID-19 hospital admissions leave the region's main city with little to celebrate. Well, that says it all. And then another one on page 2 is medical devices sector voices post-Brexit fears. And another one on top of that is test delays, slow push to contain virus. So the only positive item is about Wales on page 2, which says that Wales uses COVID response savings to help small businesses. And there is another negative into positive headline about Germany. The German Greens have got poll prospects resulting from the German flooding. And the Delta variant, which is the Indian variant, renamed Delta, as a result of the lobbying by Modi. Now, this is a piece that says that the pandemic vaccine rollout, Delta variant, takes toll in developing world, which means the countries, states that are relatively in low income. Delta death rate hits record highs in countries with fewer vaccinated people. So, for example, in Namibia, it's higher than it is in the UK, and they've measured the dates from July 1st to 14th of July in both countries. So they're talking about, let's say, the South Africa, which they are rating as poor country. In South Africa, the situation is especially acute in Gauteng province, with more than 8,000 COVID patients in its hospitals and more than 100 deaths a day. Hassan of the Health Justice Initiative said vaccine suppliers who had not fulfilled their contracts to South Africa and other poor nations bore a huge responsibility for what she called an engulfing crisis. Months of lockdown had contributed to the anger that had poured onto the streets this month. in a wave of looting and destruction, she said. And she's quoted as saying, had we had enough vaccine supplies a few months ago, we would have been in a much better position to mitigate the impact of Delta variant. Vaccine companies get to play God in a pandemic. Where is the world? Why don't they send us 50 million vaccines? We really need it right now. Now, that is the answer to the lies that Boris Johnson, the congenital liar, perpetrated through the particular motion to cut the aid to so-called third world countries. This could be one of the most beneficial initiatives as part of the aid to provide this, that the vaccine is resistant to the pandemic infections. Now there is on that same page, page 6, a headline from the briefing on the page 1, which says Asia garment workers lose $12 billion wages and jobs, says labor group. Asian garment workers have been deprived of nearly $12 billion in wages and severance pay as international retailers canceled orders and demanded price reductions during the pandemic, according to a labor rights group. That group is called Clean Clothes Campaign. Now, that should actually refer to countries like Bangladesh, and we shall be looking more at this. But they're quoting somebody from Pakistan, which is Khalid Mahmood, director of the Pakistan-based Labour Education Foundation, said layoffs and underpayments in the 2.5 trillion global fashion supply chain were not happening in just that one factory in Bangladesh or Pakistan. Well, there is the reference to both Bangladesh and Pakistan, because Bangladesh is one of the major places where significant numbers of workers work in the garment industry. But the role of the governments in Pakistan and Bangladesh in protecting the rights of their workers in the clothes sector is pitiful. It is not even marked. Now, there is a piece in the Financial Crimes on page 18 by somebody called Simone Kyriakou. Now, Simone Kyriakou is described as a senior editor, FT advisor. Now, we shall be looking at Simone Kyriakou's piece later. So she's talking about women undergoing fertility treatment still hide it from bosses because they fear dismissal. Well, that is absolutely true. That shows the reality of the culture of management in the Western capitalist businesses. Now, if women are fearing dismissal, then that shows that Boris Johnson is not doing his job. And Sajid Javid should be doing his. Well, Simone Kyriakos says under the subheading, discrimination, the absence of a supporting boss risks damaging women's long-term career prospects. Well, not only career prospects, but their health, sometimes beyond repair. Then Kyriakos says, further, fertility treatment does not carry the same protections as pregnancy when it comes to employment law, despite large numbers of women undergoing IVF. In 2018 alone, 54,000 women received fertility treatment at Human Fertilization and Embryology Association registered clinics in the UK. Should an employer terminate a woman's employment due to protracted sickness or absence caused by IVF, it is hard to back up a claim. We shall come to discussing more of that later. As we said, now this whole piece by Simone Kyriakou is not part of the trend in the financial crimes. It is actually fact-based and almost wholly truthful, which is a kind of exception to the norm in the financial crimes pieces, because they are dubious, they are contradictory, and they're vague in the main. For example, we said about Pilitia Clark. What's her name? Her name, again we shall say, Pilitia Clark, on mediocre workers having nowhere to hide. Now that heading, whoever wrote that heading, is completely wrong, false, and against the workers and against the rights of the workers. And that piece about the garment workers in Asia being shortchanged and being left unprotected and not paid at all. That piece itself warrants more substantive references to the role played by the government in each of the countries where large numbers of garment workers are having to struggle. And so therefore that is the piece that is rare, and it actually addresses the reason for renaming the Financial Times as the Financial Crimes. If there were more pieces with the same kind of evidential trend, like the one byline to Simone Kyriakou today, which is headed, "Let's break the silence around IBF in workplaces." I mean, the Kyriakou piece itself should be followed up by a number of other pieces about the role played by the judicial system. Because currently, the judiciary in England, Little England, is a corrupt judiciary which favors the workers exploiters, let's say, and which opposes and denies rights to the workers. For example, yesterday's Sunday Times, £3. That's the Sunday Times yesterday. And that's the piece by, this is the piece that we are going to focus on. The piece by Louise Tickle and Emily Dugan. Louise Tickle has tweeted since we have seen yesterday about this pedophile. The pedophile who took his former partner to family court. A convicted pedophile was allowed to put his ex-partner through 37 family court hearings over 8 years to make fruitless demands for equal access to his children. The children's mother, Julia, has spent at least £250,000 in legal fees to protect her 2 children. Her ex-partner received legal aid, but she had to remortgage her house and borrow from her parents. Now that is obviously a wider issue about the judicial corruption of the judiciary. And in order to deal with the silence on the IBF in workplaces that Simone Kyriakou's piece is about or headed on, the role of the judiciary and the role of the judicial platforms, that is the tribunals and related other aspects of the judicial bureaucracy. That cannot be dealt with without examining the full details of the empirical attempts by the victims of workplace IBF lack of support and rights. So the judicial tiers and the judicial framework needs to be examined in detail in order to set out a complete and just and practical and beneficial and helpful framework through the legal system, if this can be made to apply to the women suffering from rightslessness on IBF. And this is just a tip of the iceberg, this IBF thing. All other aspects of health, all other aspects of rights of women and rights of workers concerned are treated by the employers, mainly the culture of employers, assuming denial of obligation, denial of rights, and denial of duties owed to the workers and in this context, the women. So that shows that the Little England judiciary is completely not fit for purpose. And that also shows that the wider curriculums of these so-called schools of law, either in the colleges or universities or other similar comparative recognized, officially recognized academic kind of platforms or organizations that are providing license law trading courses, that they are unfit for purpose. And that shows that the UK Parliament is asleep. And that shows that even before Keir Starmer politically murdered the Labour Party was already dead. Because they don't. The Labour Party in Parliament or in society, if they are ever spotted in society, the Labour Party is dead. It doesn't monitor and it doesn't intellectually, rigorously, morally, ethically, evidentially monitor, audit, examine the institutions, the programs. Institutions either as academic institutions or as license issuing institutions like the four Insup Court and the Law Society of England, Little England, which corruptly has the name Wales after the end as a dishonest claim that Wales matters. It doesn't when it comes to making policies. So it's not just the breaking of the silence of around the IBF in workplaces. It's actually breaking the deadly denial of rights. Because there must be literally thousands of serious cases, either fatal or near fatal, suffered by women due to IVF support missing, being unavailable. So this piece by Simone Kiriakou is based on her own experience in terms of the support that she needed and the support she got. And what she is doing with this piece is significantly relying on the empirical experience, which actually transforms the quality of the comments and commentary she has put in the piece. This is not the case with the writers, most of the other writers on Financial Times who don't have the personal experience. And we have a direct access to certain information about this particular one, Simone Kiriakou, because we are in contact through Twitter. This was based on the particular tweet that Simone Kiriakou posted a while back, saying that she was a feeder of cats, that is, feeder of cats in the street. So we responded and we have stayed in contact, not very frequent contact, but periodic contacts whenever it is relevant through Twitter. So we have the insight into the personnel attitude and outlook of this particular writer, which you don't have about other writers on the financial crimes, not the current ones. And this writer, Laura Empson, who is the writer just above the piece by Simone Kiriakou, is talking about the outdated fantasy idea of many of the managers. Many of the managers actually want the office life back. That's what this Empson piece is about. One of the things that happens in offices, well, more likely in larger offices, medium-sized offices, is the possibility, the circumstances facilitating, allowing mainly male bosses to sexually harass, target, and abuse and exploit women workers. This may or may not be happening as far as Laura Empson knows, but that is what we think is happening. And Laura Empson is a professor in the management of professional services and is an author of Leading Professionals, Power, Politics, and Prima Donnas. And this is a guest column by Laura Empson, while the usual writer Andrew Hill is away. Work and careers. And she is critical of the management that are insistent on the return of the office atmosphere, office life. Now, this piece about the US health litigator rides SPAC boom for 33 billion is a tip of the iceberg about the essential corruption and criminality of capitalism and the hedge fund and the big property exploitation business. Because this actually shows that property is a criminality crime in itself and has to be treated as constituting prima facie evidence of crimes. And this actually runs side by side with the propaganda that the congenital liar Boris Johnson and his facilitators, the scum and the Daily Mail, have been running against lockdown, against restrictions, against rules, and to let the pandemic rip. Because in the piece about the worrying prospect for Newcastle and the Northeast, it says in the UK, this article says, has one of the world's highest COVID-19 rates. And many experts are warning that complete unlocking is irresponsible. But ministers are asking, if not now, when? Well, the question should not be, if not now, when? The question is how to reduce and eventually eliminate COVID-19. That is what the question should be. So the financial crimes headline is correct, but in the contents, in the copy underneath it, they don't tell the whole truth about the state of dysfunction and disarray that Boris Johnson has created and is making worse starting today. This whole piece about the US health litigator riding spec boom for 33 billion is another proof that big looters and thieves are let loose on societies. So the evidence strongly warrants the treatment of big billionaires like these ones as criminals and their conduct as prima facie evidence and ground justifying criminal prosecution. We shall come back to that in due course, of course. But that is again another world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street and of the big interest criminals that the Fleet Street papers promote and serve as agents and promoters of. Now, this editor of the Financial Crimes, the woman born in Lebanon, is actually abusing her position. This Lebanese American is using her commercial tech expertise to structure the company's AI mission, writes Madhumita Murgia. Now, Madhumita Murgia is of Indian origin, wherever she was born. So, this is a piece that the Financial Crimes is actually promoting also via their website called Leadership. More interviews illuminating the personalities of high-profile leaders by focusing on the issues they face. ft.com, How to Lead. Now, obviously, the How to Lead includes only how to profit and how to greed. It doesn't actually include how to end greed, how to share, and how to do justice to all who contribute. That is to say, to coin a phrase, Charlie Marx's theory about labor and how labor is exploited by the company. The surplus labor theory, or the theory of surplus labor. And treating Charlie Marx as an intellectual analyst rather than as a person plotting revolution to overthrow the world as we know it. So we shall be ending this 1 hour, hopefully 1 hour at this stage, and continue in the next parts.